you all taking the time out of your lunch hour to join our advocacy meeting today. We have Senate President Albritton, who has served in the legislature for now, 16 years?
Just finished the 15th session.
Just finished his 15th session, so he will be, it'll be his 16th year going into this next session. But Senate President Albritton, he'll be going to his last session as a senator and the Senate President coming up next spring. And we just finished a long but awesome session this past session. He is a senator who definitely, it's cool to see lead as a Senate President because he leads with integrity and responsibility and character. And you'll see that as you get to know him and hear him talk today. But if you all know anything about him, you'll know that he doesn't like to do things that aren't genuine. So anything that he says, you can take it to heart about the budget and about the things that he's talking about today, because he doesn't blow smoke. He cares about vulnerable populations. Agriculture is his big thing. That's his avenue. But he's worked with our former CEO, Alan Abramowitz, on many bills and policy changes in the past regarding children and foster care. And of course, now as Alan moved into adults with intellectual or developmental disabilities, Senator Albritton has also helped Alan with many policy changes and law bills as well. And the last session before he was Senate President, he was a big part of the 11% rate increase that we all got across the board for our providers. So that was amazing. And so he continues to help be a champion for us. And I will give it over to him. Thank you all for being here.
Hey, thanks, Dustin. That was very kind, buddy. Appreciate you. I love you. Hello, everybody. Can everybody hear me okay? Yep, good. Okay. So first of all, first thing I want to say is I want to say thanks. Appreciate you making time for this today. And I'm so glad it worked out. The opportunity to be able to share a little perspective about last session, considering all of the, all of the turmoil, at least from the reporting standpoint, that seemed to exist from the outside. I wanted to be sure and get the record set straight. First of all, the internal process of what happened last year was, I think, quite honestly, at least to some extent, underreported and then overreported in some other spaces. There's certainly, I can certainly say this: the governor and the House as a whole are, not functionally as close as the Senate and the governor, and most of the policy and processes in Tallahassee, or at least through this last session. So, first and foremost, this last year was interesting. It was my 15th session, and it was interesting in that through the COVID years, the federal government had put just a huge amount of money into Florida, as they did other states. Our pro rata share was close to $12 billion. And through that, we had the opportunity to invest in a lot of spaces, some of which Dustin mentioned, and then others just one time, nearly once in a generation investments into certain aspects, transportation, higher education, and the like. And that was great. The challenge is we are seeing the Florida budget essentially recalibrate. It certainly doesn't mean we're in a recession or any of those things. Our economy is pretty strong. Our unemployment is low, but it is certainly recalibrating to more of a pre-COVID revenue situation, which means, right, there was a calibration that happened over the last, not including this last session, but 3 or 4 years, to where there was a lot of a lot of money spent. And the speaker and I started a conversation about 2 years ago, and wanted to make sure that we were keeping the necessary constitutional requirements of a balanced budget, as well as just a common sense, logical approach to making sure that we were looking very closely at every piece of the budget, some of which had not been scrubbed or scoured in some time, to be able to provide for this recalibration on our revenues and make sure that we're accumulating as much data as possible, so that we could make more well-informed decisions in where to create investments. You would see, if you look through the budget, you would see and will see lots of spaces to where in the proviso language attached to an appropriation there are new reporting requirements, and basically what that does is it builds a baseline, moving us away from just outputs and more focused on outcomes. The outcomes are the measure that we should all be using to determine, and I'm sure that that's what ARC does, and many of the services that are used here in Florida. Your outcome would be, what are the results of the expenditure? What are the results of the efforts? What are the real results? How are the lives of the people that are being touched by a particular program, how are they being bettered? And what does that actually look like, instead of just, we spent X amount of money and, that's that. So that's a lot of what happened this year. There was a lot of discussion about reducing spending, and that actually took place. We were, I think, somewhere between, I haven't done the exact math, but somewhere between $2.5 and $3 billion less than last year's budget. And on a per capita basis, it is certainly, less than this last year. With a growing state, you can't always, and the speaker and the governor agreed, you can't always just cut, because if you're, the number of people that you're servicing as citizens of the state, or even tourists of the state, whoever comes through here, is growing, then it makes some sense that the budget, to achieve stability, needs to stay strong. So that's where we ended. And I would say, of the 15 budgets that I have helped assemble and voted on through the years, this was a very strong budget. It was strong for the environment. It was strong in many of our social services. It was strong in transportation, education, healthcare. It was a good budget. The rhetoric outside of the Capitol was much more. I would say it was much more, showed a lot more disagreement than what the actual agreements were inside the Capitol. And that's, pretty logical. The people buy newspapers with catchy headlines, hey, the governor and the House are fighting, and so said so about so, and those kind of things. But at the end of the day, inside the Capitol, where the work was going on, there was a lot of good work, a lot of looking at data, and really trying to make sure that we're doing the right thing for the right reasons. So I'm proud of this budget, and it sets us up, I think, going forward, to be able to make additional key investments in the future, because there were we showed fiscal restraint in a lot of cases. So anyhow, that really is it. There was no substantial warfare on the inside. A lot of discussion, some disagreement, but we worked through it, and we made things happen. And then lastly, I'll leave you with this. I think the people of Florida, at least in my estimation, the people of Florida. Sorry, we got a bird having an issue over there. I think the people of Florida are well served when you have a host of ideas, sometimes maybe in conflict with each other, or different ideas, because if you are practicing being open-minded and you are practicing being a good listener, and you can learn a lot from somebody that disagrees with you. And I found, especially right at the end, as we were trying to work through and get the plane landed, and we got down to, I think there were 32 or 33 things on the final list the speaker and I went through. We, through that discussion, when I walked in the room, I really had guessed maybe 8 or 10 of those we could do. And after we had some conversation to understand in more clear terms where each of us were coming from, we ended up agreeing on 20 of those 32. So, that was a lot of the process that happened. Very healthy for the legislature, healthy for Floridians, and we got some good results. So that's really, I wanted to anyhow start the conversation with that, because it really does matter. Good government matters, efficient government matters, outcome metrics matter, and that's where we focused. So anyhow, there you go. I'm happy to take any questions that anybody might have.
We can open it up for questions. You can put it in the chat. We do have a couple questions that, so what are your goals for next session? And as it relates to those with IDD?
Interesting. So when Alan was the what would the role be? Director or chair? CEO? Yep. So Alan and I go way back. We'd worked together in 2013 for on child normalcy, the normalcy bill, 2013. I worked with when I was in the House, I worked with the state senator, Nancy Dietert. She's since passed, but she was just a fantastic woman, super strong, and had a heart of gold. We passed the normalcy bill, the Keys to Independence bill, just various things I'd worked with Alan on to try to address real challenges going on inside the system of the foster and adoption space, to be able to bring real, not just relief, but solutions to families that needed us to be better listeners. My goal, as it relates to this space, would be hopefully to do the same kind of thing. Right? What I understand is what it feels like there's likely some similarities with the families that are struggling with folks that exist inside the space, and there's also going to be some substantial differences in what impacts those families, and how those services are not just rendered but received, and what the outcome metrics are for getting better outcomes. So my hope would be is that over this summer and this fall, that we could begin a conversation about something along the same lines as not it may be the wrong terminology, but something along the lines of normalcy, in that taking a very close look at where the specific challenges are that we need to be addressing, and have just some honest dialogue about what those are, what the role of the state government should be, what maybe it should not be, and just beginning to start it. I would love for this next year to be a great year for that kind of thing in this space. If that makes sense.
It does. We do have 2 questions in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
One is regarding dental funding that was returned because the Agency for Persons with Disabilities failed to utilize it. So how do you feel about the system of support so that individuals can access these services?
Good question. Before I say anything about that, I've got a lot to learn about that. So I don't, I want to be sure that anybody that knows me, have worked with me in this process, understands that I do work hard to be a good listener. I ask a lot of questions. I'm a question guy by nature. So we want to make sure, one, that if we have funding that is for a specific purpose and it is not utilized, then the larger question is the why, right? Why was it not utilized? Recognizing there's likely, plenty of folks that need the service, right? The question is, why did it fall short? But we run into this all the time in the budget, to where we would, here's an example, as we were trying to work on the right sizing, and this is a perfect example, I think. We ran into a program that had a $20 million yearly in the base budget, which means recurring, had a $20 million appropriation every year. The most they had ever spent was $12 million, the most. But yet it was on the books every year for $20 million. So they would spend between $10 and $12 million, and then the legislature would essentially backfill that to fill it back up to $20 million, but every single year it wouldn't get filled. So our staff right now, we did some right sizing. We dropped that to 15 million this year in that particular area. And now we are requiring much of the interaction, the proviso I was talking about earlier, to try to figure out the why. It was projected to be a cost of $20 million, but it never got there. So we're working on that now. That's the best example I can give you from the dental standpoint of trying to figure out, on the delivery side, what are the challenges, the shortcomings, and how can we make that system not more efficient in not lowering costs, but more efficient on the delivery standpoint, so that if there are folks that need the service and aren't getting it, then we can understand why they're not, and we can get that solved. If that made sense.
How do you feel about transportation? In general, there's, for a lot of individuals, and especially for the population that we serve, it's a barrier. And there's just great methodology throughout the state.
So I'm open to that conversation. I know there was some conversation this last year about it. There were things just like this in other spaces, some in the transportation space and some in K through 12, that essentially, with all of the things flying around and all of the work that was going on, we just literally ran out of time. So that's another space to where we should, this summer and this fall, have some conversation. I'd like to get my staff involved as well, because they are the legitimate experts. As presiding officer, what I've also learned is that your best skill set's knowing how to ask the questions and ask the right questions to understand, and with advocates too, to understand what's really going on. You can, as a presiding officer, when you say one thing or another, stuff happens. And what's really important is to make sure that when you say something, when you make a decision, that it is well informed as possible, so that the right thing happens and not just something. So yeah, I'm certainly open to the conversation about transportation, and figure out, what again, it goes back to, like, what are the barriers? What do they really look like? And then, are there things government should be doing to be able to facilitate that? And how do you produce accountability in that space? Because I will tell you, here's one of the biggest challenges we have in state government, and this is not across the board, but it does exist, is that there are folks that take advantage of the system. There are folks that just take advantage of the system, and whether it's some kind of scheme to double bill or just whatever it is, right? There are folks that just ethically try to take advantage of the system. So you have to work through that and build something that's accountable and transparent. So I'm certainly open to that. Yes.
What about your thoughts on the renewal of Medicaid eligibility? We had a lot of individuals that lost their eligibility, and then, we're going into the managed care. That seemed to be a large focus.
So I've actually thought a lot about this space, and had a lot of conversation with the managed care companies, a lot of conversation with advocates that are on the receiving end, or represent folks on the receiving end. I don't know the answer to the question on how we calibrate or recalibrate Medicaid, because What I don't know is where are the feds going to be, right? We're aware at this point of, and this is this goes back to the spending reductions, which quite honestly, it's almost $36 trillion necessary at the federal level. I mean, we don't want those folks up there bankrupting the country, right? So they've got to take a look at where they can cut spending. We're already aware of conversations happening in the environmental space. The folks up in DC have floated ideas that would change the cost share on some of the, essentially increase the state share, state spending to accomplish things. We're aware of it in SNAP benefits. That is out there. And look, even in emergency management, there's conversations now. Used to be that FEMA would respond to a $40 million loss, basically, if the governor declares a state of emergency. And they're talking now, the feds are talking now and floated the idea of increasing that 40 million up to 160 million, I believe. So it'd have to be $160 million loss for FEMA to respond at all. So my expectation is leading into this next session, once they pass the spending bill and call it the recalibration bill they're working on now in Congress, just passed the Senate and it's going back to the House to be marked up. There are going to be some financial challenges the state's going to need to look at on, how do we respond to, here's an example. What if the feds say, okay, this particular space has a, 80-20, feds cover 80%, the state covers 20% in the Medicaid space. That varies depending on what service or what process you're looking at. And what if they went from 80-20 to, 60-40? So about, let's see, not this particular budget. I don't have those numbers. The budget a year ago, the one we just finished, June 30, the federal pass-through dollars were about $38 billion of the around 118 of the state budget, and that's around 32 and a piece, almost 33%. So whatever comes out of, the long story short is, whatever comes out of DC on where they're going to be on their spending and what that new math will look like for the state's going to be a huge topic next year. It's going to be across the board, every silo, education, healthcare, any kind of social service. I mean, there's just a huge amount of federal dollars that come through that support the efforts here in Florida. And we've got to figure out what that's going to look like before we can have any kind of honest dialogue about, what we're going to spend money on at all. You think about that. If it's just a 10% cut in federal pass-through dollars that are supportive of Florida, 10% is going to end up being somewhere around, $3 to $4, maybe $4.5 billion. So, there's going to be some big changes, and we're going to have to really understand what that is before we can really get our arms around what the next budget looks like. It may be one of the most challenging budget years that we will have seen in some time next year.
What about individuals with disabilities and what they're carved out of the Medicaid spending? And then what should we pay attention to moving forward?
Well, that really goes back to my previous comment. I don't know what it's going to look like. So I'll use this analogy. The game's still going to be baseball. There'll still be a mound. There'll still be a plate. There'll be 3 bases. There'll be, 9 folks out in the field. Still going to have a cleanup hitter, but there are going to be some changes. Maybe then it takes 2 strikes to strike out instead of 3. All right. I mean, there are going to be some substantial changes at the federal government, which I am supportive of, having kids and grandkids. But I don't know what the right answer to that would be until we understand where the feds are coming from, because there's two parts of the federal partnership. One is the dollar amount, and two is the prescription on the direction on what we can do with those dollars, and what kind of flexibility the state has. Some of the programs are very, very tight from the feds, where you can only do X and you can't do X plus 1 or X plus even 0.1. Other programs have more flexibility. I would expect the dollars to come down, and I also would hope that there would be some flexibility built into a lower funding amount, so that the state would have more bandwidth and flexibility to be able to look for needs and cover them. But I don't know what that's going to look like. I don't know anybody really understands what that's going to look like at this point.
Okay, so another question is, how can parents and individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities get our voices heard with legislatures and larger agencies? What would you suggest? What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, first of all, I need to say this: like, ARCA Florida is well respected, and there's no question about it. Anybody that just pays attention even a little bit understands that the the population that are served are important, and they're real, right? It's not as though, this is going to sound terrible, please forgive me, this is not my heart, this is my mind, but you don't fake developmental disability. Can you fake some other kind of illness? Can you fake an injury? And we've had rampant fraud in the PIP system, in auto insurance for years. People fake injuries in schemes, but you can't. Nobody is faking a developmental disability. All right, so that in itself grants the space a lot of credibility. Now, as an individual, and you guys, please hear me on this, what I'm going to say to you, this may be, not that the other questions have not been or will not be important. This question matters. It matters, and it may be the most important one. The first thing is, when you look at, there's 120 House members, there are 40 senators. I can't tell you how important it is. It is nearly immeasurable to get in contact with whoever your representative is wherever you live, the senator wherever you live, and just, if you can, make the time to just go sit down and have a conversation with them. Just explain in real terms what the challenges are that you're experiencing, and be transparent. It goes without saying, be honest, be thoughtful. Obviously thank them for their time. And at the end of the conversation, just say, hey, do you have any ideas that could help us solve this? Or, could we count on you to keep this front of mind, and, work to try to build a solution for us on this. And then, give them a little time and follow back up. And lastly, on this point, the art of follow-up is lost in today's society. So, you just because you go and you sit down and have a conversation with Representative, Jones, I don't think there's a Jones, but I just made that up. But you go sit down and talk to a Representative Jones, and she's delightful, and you have a great conversation, and it's a really good dialogue. Don't leave it there. Consistency matters. It matters. And, follow up with them, maybe, in a couple of weeks, with a simple phone call or a handwritten note. Boy, you talk about a lost art. A handwritten note thanking them for their time and how much you appreciated them, listening to your concerns. And then maybe in, a month or a month and a half, follow up with a phone call to the office and just say, hey, this is so-and-so. We came in and met. Really appreciate that. What can, and then offer, what can I do to be helpful? How can I partner with your office to advocate on behalf of this community? That, folks, I'm telling you, that matters. It works. I've got a group of handwritten notes that people, some I met with in the district, some I met with in the Capitol, that I keep that just touched me. And, they just did a really good job of following up and showing that they were appreciative. So anyhow, I would encourage you, the name of the game is to get in the game. Get in the game. And that's how your voices will be heard the best, and then be consistent about it.
I really like what you said about being thoughtful and being nice. And I think as parents and advocates, we need to realize that, we shouldn't just storm in there and ask about XYZ, because there's a lot going on. There's a lot of other issues. But being thoughtful and truly polite is helpful.
You're exactly right. And one of the things, being a presiding officer, one of the things really quickly that matters, the Senate is a member-driven process. The reason that advocacy I just described and you and I are talking about here matters is that senators are senators. I don't give direction to the Senate. The senators give direction to their space. When I put a chair in place of a committee, Erin Grawl is chair of Children and Families Committee. She has carte blanche. And I did that because I know her heart. Right? That's why she earned that spot, because I know her heart, and I know that she cares about people in a genuine way. She's a solid human being, a great Christian woman, and she really does care about folks. So setting the tone of the Senate really matters. And our theme this year was 1 Corinthians 13:13. These three remain: faith, hope, and love. The greatest of these is love. And you saw it all over the Senate this year, as even when senators would disagree, I saw it numerous times. A senator would walk over and give the other one a hug, tell them they love them, right? I mean, it was all of this, including advocacy about love. It's because you love somebody, or you love a family, or so. That's the tone of the Senate, and that's why I say, to your point, spot on, thoughtful, kind. Coming to them in love is going to be something to where my hope would be that a senator would receive that in the, with the, the idea of, love being what drives this entire process. And anyhow, that's good.
Summer, did you have a question?
I do have a question. Thank you, Mr. President, for being here. It's great to have you in your leadership position, for sure. Dina mentioned, or one of the questions on some of the barriers being transportation. I know, being in rural communities, and we have a lot of families and a lot of self-advocates and providers that are in our rural communities, and that presents itself with a lot of barriers, not just transportation. With your rural renaissance and that being a priority, do you see that coming back again next session, and maybe how we can work together in ways of everywhere we talked about today, but maybe in that rural space as well, because access, transportation, choice, workforce, all have such an impact when we are trying to make sure that we're providing the best services for folks that are in the community. Just thoughts on that.
Well, first of all, thanks for your kind words. I appreciate that. And as it relates to the rural renaissance, 100% yes. As a matter of fact, the expectation should be it's going to come back bigger and better. And here's what's fascinating about the rural renaissance. So last year let me turn my phone off. Last year, the bill was built over a period of months, looking at a lot of factors. This year, there are already 2 or 3 new ideas that have come over the last couple of months that will be included in the Rural Renaissance package. But here's what's really fascinating. So Corey Simon, the sponsor of the bill, he and I had a Zoom call with Secretary Rollins, the Ag Secretary for the USDA. And the Trump administration is super excited about the idea of rural renaissance, and she was already beginning to explore ideas in how do we take something like this. And but let me be clear, I'm not suggesting that this, because rural Florida is important to me because where I'm from. So that in itself is the basis of the rural renaissance. But Secretary Rollins was sharing with Corey and I that this just isn't happening anywhere in the country. That this is a really, really big deal, and the rural challenge and the challenges you're talking about, they exist all over the country, and it's not just in the space you represent. There are some major challenges in rural Florida to getting access to, just call them quality of life issues. And I have every expectation, and she and I are actually do a follow-up here pretty soon. I have every expectation that next session, the Trump administration is going to be really engaged in the discussion of rural renaissance. And I have high expectations for that package, whatever it looks like in the end, to be able to be passed next year. And then secondarily, which is really fascinating, to see it literally go nationwide. That just, shocks me beyond belief. But, Florida's done a good job of leading, and this is one space to where, yes, ma'am, you're going to see it. And you just gave me an idea, by the way. When we get off the phone, I'm going to call my staff in the Capitol and talk with them about this population and start working on, maybe there's a way to add into that a component that deals with the transportation piece, because if you're suffering from a transportation shortfall in an urban area, you could, depending on cost, I'm just throwing this out there, you have access to Uber, you have access to ways to be able to get where you're going, but not so much in rural Florida. That probably would still be in existence. So let me think about that one. That there may be a way. Good call. Let me think about that. That sounds interesting.
Sounds like a good idea. Thank you.
Yes.
Do we have any other topics that have not been touched on that we can ask? You can put them in the chat.
I put a question in the chat about the legislative intention regarding autism and APD qualification criteria. That I'm going to read you what I said because it's more, I have a traumatic brain injury. It says, many parents are struggling to get their young adults approved under APD, even though they are not capable to be independent and are not safe on their own. They have severe developmental delays, social communication, self-regulation behaviors, though they are not intellectually disabled. We can't sleep at night not knowing what will happen to our children that can't function independently and aren't safe on their own. APD changed their advertising from autism to severe autism, even though the language in the Florida rule has stayed the same, although the word severe were in there, but it was regarding learning and communication. And I know in several areas, it's people are not qualifying that have had Baker Acts and even other things. And I'm just wondering what the legislative intent is regarding the severity. We know kids that are high functioning, quote unquote, aren't required, but kids that have capabilities to think, but they're not able to make decisions, and they can't live on their own, and they're medically complicated, and we're not being able to get on the wait list.
What a great question. So that's something I want to think about as well. As you're likely aware, ma'am, this last year, and this did start with an interaction I had with a family in the Capitol that had 3 sons, all of which were autistic and 2 severely autistic. And it was an incredible interaction, touched me very deeply. And that's where our autism bill came from this last year. So what I would expect is, and I'm happy to work with you guys going forward, what I would expect is there would be some open-mindedness. Now, you talk about legislative intent, and I want to be sure to clarify, I can provide legislative intent for Ben Albritton, but I cannot for the governor, and I cannot for the House. And I do not for every senator. But what I will tell you is this: the conversation, the broad scale conversation about autism in the Florida legislature and specifically in the Senate is alive and well. And that started this year. So if we could work together on this to help me be able to get my mind around it, I'm happy to get my staff engaged. You know, this autism thing is real.
May I reach out to your office, your legislative aid? I'm not in your district, but my son went to the Capitol. We didn't get to happen to meet with you, and he's learning to advocate for autism and these type of things, so that you can get to know our families and how we can help educate you what our issues are.
Yes, ma'am. And you are Sandy, is that right?
Sandy Studeville. Sandy like the beach. That's what I tell people.
Sandy, what part of the state do you live in?
I'm in Brevard County. I work with Nicole Grabner. I also know Stephanie Norton. I work with We the People. So I am fairly active in advocacy. I have a traumatic brain injury myself, and I used to be on the brain and spinal cord injury program. So, and I have worked hard to get to where I can take care of my son, but I can't sleep at night because he's not all the way there yet to where he can be independent. He can't detect strangers. He can't, he doesn't have any social skills at all. He's innocent. He's 21 and can do complex math, but he watches Paw Patrol show. He's very innocent and naive, and he can't really apply the math to make it useful for a job. So,
yes. Well, the answer to the question, Sandy, is yes. I'm happy to. You're certainly welcome to reach out to Karen Whaley on my staff. She lives in Bartow. Happy to do that. But I would also say this to you. I know. So your senator, if it's Brevard, your senator now is Debbie Mayfield.
Yes.
And I've known Debbie for 16 years, and I will tell you, number one, I am happy she is going to be back in the Florida Senate. She is a great advocate and is like a bulldog on things that really matter to her. I would also, excuse me. I would encourage you to reach out to her office as well. And if you don't have any luck with that, which Debbie's great with constituent services, that would shock me. But I would also reach out to her and meet with her.
Yeah, that's in our plans.
Yes, ma'am. Good. That's great. Debbie.
And I also want to thank you what you did for the scholarships. And could I mention one other thing that's an issue regarding the scholarships is that, yes. And I don't know if it's a rule, somebody was looking this up, whether it's something SUFS did or if it's in the law, but right now they're telling us when our children turn 22, we can still use the funding. We won't get new funding, and I understand that, but we can only use the funding for 3 years unless they start a post-secondary program. And I don't understand that when it's UA. So the kids that can't go to college because one, they're not intellectually disabled, so they fall through the crack of that program, the college experience for the intellectually disabled, and they're not capable enough to go to college on their own, they're going to lose out on the money, even though it would help them with social skills and work and things like that. That's the way it's set up right now. And I think I'm very disappointed in that, since it's a UA scholarship. And it's like, so anyway, I don't know if you're aware of that issue or not.
Actually, no, ma'am, I was not. Happy to look into that one as well.
Okay, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yes, ma'am.
So nice to have people in the legislature that care. And I was amazed at my interactions with the legislators this year. Which is our first.
That's good to hear. That's good to hear. Thank you, and appreciate your kind words. We're doing the best we can to, juggle all the issues and do the right thing for the right reasons. It gets pretty complicated sometimes, but that's why that advocacy and all the work you're doing personally really matters.
Senator Albritton, here is an interesting question that you may have some feedback on. Current developing of immigration laws decreasing the amount of caregivers for the IDD population, and it's hard to attract US caregivers willing to do the job. Do you have any ideas or plans regarding how to increase the rates so that we can staff this population?
Well, this really goes back to depending on where the feds land, right? That's really where this is going to be, because I'm not interested in, I'm not going to sugarcoat anything. There are in this population, we run into the same kind of thing in a lot of different places, and there's what we find is that there's just not enough money to go around. The problem that we could run into is why I do not want to say anything on this call that anyone would take away I don't want anybody on this call to take away, well, the Senate president said we're going to do this, and all of a sudden it doesn't happen. The worst thing in the world that could ever happen to me, not just as a legislator, but a human being, is for me to be perceived as not having integrity, and my word mean nothing. So I want to be real clear on that. Sorry, I had an ant on me. Look, at the end of the day, right? At the end of the day, hang on there. At the end of the day, I've got to say this. The illegal immigration challenge in the country has been out of control for years, for decades. And now we've got a president whom I support. We got a president that wants to take a look at this and try to figure out. I know this. I've had interactions with the White House, and this is one of the things that I appreciate about the president. He really wants to get there are folks here illegally that are bad people, and they do bad things, and that is really his laser focus in all of this, and I applaud him for that. And then secondly, revamping this system so that illegal immigration is not a problem like it has been going forward. I applaud him for that. Now, part of that challenge is it's going to disrupt things, much like his conversations with other countries about tariffs. It's going to be, if the president showed us anything, if he sees a problem, he doesn't have a problem being disruptive to try to solve it. Doesn't mean we all agree or disagree with anything he does, but he is certainly going to run to the fight to try to figure out how to get it solved. And this illegal immigration thing's a problem. So I would not want to make any specific comment about that until I can understand, where's the state of Florida going to be financially once the feds make all the changes they need to make. It is also very possible we could see upwards to $8 or $10 billion worth of cuts in federal funding. You look at the state of Florida, third most populous state in the country, $38 billion came through here in this, what was the most recent budget, to see, a 25 or 30% cut in that. I think that's real. Do I think it will manifest itself? I don't know. But I know this much. I know before we have conversation about any additional funding, we've got to figure out where the state of Florida actually stands. And this goes back to the outcome metrics that I was talking about earlier. What is the baseline? And then once you have the baseline, how are you going to measure going forward? What are you going to measure against? And what are you going to call a success? And what are you going to call a failure? That's what an outcome actually is. So I would just say before, until we we know where we're going to be on federal funding, we just can't have a conversation about any kind of additions. Recognizing, you could get into a situation. I'll just throw this out there, and this is the reason this is difficult. And that's okay. I'm an elected official, and I get elected to try to do hard things, and that is fine. But data drives it, information drives it. And, what if we get put into a situation to where we are having to make difficult choices between SNAP benefits, emergency management and preparedness and response, intellectual disability support? You just list them, right? On the list of, there's tons of kids programs that come through for healthcare in the Department of Health and ACA. There's so much uncertainty right now. It wouldn't be fair for me to make a comment about what we can and can't do. I'm sorry. I think that would be unfair to all the listeners.
Understandable. Speaking of data, how does Ben Albritton feel about collecting data on autism and the future, since this is, you mentioned, very well aware of in the Senate?
Yes, ma'am. Well, in our autism bill, so we have there's a lot of that's going to be new. Please excuse me. Sorry, frog got in there. Here's what's fascinating about autism. The numbers that I've seen, and I'm gonna try to quote these numbers. 20 years ago, maybe 1 in 200 kids. And many of those now. 20 years ago, those would be adults. Back to Sandy's comments. Now we're somewhere around 1 in 24. The kids that are diagnosed or they're identified to be autistic. That's a huge swing. That's really where the genesis of all this started. When I first saw those numbers, well, somebody just said 1 in 31. Yeah, that's thanks for the clarification. That's still that's a lot. There's a lot of Floridians and a lot of Florida families that will be impacted by autism. So the data collection and all of those metrics that will help government work together with society to be able to produce better outcomes for those kids and adults is in motion. It's in motion now. So, I've got one more session, so I'm going to be gone. If we talk about legacy for a minute, part of legacy for me is not just not just 1 Corinthians 13:13 love, being how the Senate operates, but that they look at this stuff in real terms, right? The Senates of the future look at this stuff not where we wish we were, but where we are, right? And I think it's going to be somebody be hard pressed to prove that this is not a substantial dynamic inside of society today and the families of Florida that needs to be on the radar every single year. And my hope with the autism bill this last year, and we're looking at ways to enhance that even more already this coming year, my hope is that autism stays on the radar and the dialogue. And this goes back to the very first point in this about advocacy. Listen, if you are not just Sandy, but if you're a parent of a young adult or a child that has autism and they have these real challenges, don't let your legislators forget about it. I mean, here's what happens, y'all. I've seen this over and over. When you change presiding officers and you change faces in the Senate or the House, most times you're kind of on to the next shiny thing. And the good work you started and the internal or external advocacy that you started to help tackle a problem, or at a minimum, just identify, hey, this is actually a problem. And here's the data that shows it. Can we do something about it? Just those processes sometimes fall by the wayside. And I mean, quite honestly, it breaks my heart, especially in the space of foster and adoption and autism for sure. But we've got to make sure. I mean, I'll speak as a Floridian. We've got to make sure that going forward, even well past 2026 session, that autism and IDD stay on the radar. And the folks, whoever that may be, folks in the legislature 5, 6, 7, 8 years from now, understand this is real. We're real people. These are real challenges, and we need some help. So, that's what I'm hoping to propel forward once I'm gone.
And I know I want to be mindful of your time. We do have one more question from one of our chapter members, Kathleen Porter.
Yeah. Good afternoon, Senator Albritton. Thank you for taking the time on your obvious much needed vacation. I have a personal thank you, a global thank you, and then a comment. So personally, Ridge Area ARC here in Highlands County was a recipient of a local project that was sponsored by Senator Grahl. It was not a significant amount of money, but I know that you supported it, and it will mean for us that we can care for adults with autism and elopement issues, which is a huge issue here in our rural area. So you've helped us to fix that. I also globally want to thank you. You talked a little bit about some proviso that you have in the back of your bills that talks about accountability, transparency, and reporting from the state agencies. As a provider, I always want to be collaborative with the state and with the state agencies that we interact with. So I think it's super important to always open that dialogue. I've known you to be very transparent, and we've seen it here on this call. So thank you for that. The last thing is, we often bring to our legislators, here are our issues, here are our needs. But one of the things you talked about, and I just want to say that we will do our best to do, is when we come to you with an issue, we will try to come to you with some possible solutions. And so anyone who's on the call now should be calling their local representative in whichever side of the legislation to talk about both problems and solutions. So I'll be in contact. Thank you so much for everything that you do for us.
Thank you, Kathleen, for your kind words, and thanks for all the work that you do. I know that there's a little note popped up. I guess there's 15 of these types of organizations around the state. Hopefully they're all represented here, because I want to say thank you. I know that every day you get up and you go to work, it's almost the word that comes to mind is like magical, right? Because you're driven by a passion to help folks in this space. And that's what gets you up every day and gets you to work and helps you get through hard issues. And so I just want to say thanks to everybody that pours themselves into this community and these families. It certainly means a lot for folks like me, and I'll say that not as presiding officer, but just as one, as a Floridian that cares about Florida in the long haul, and then two, knowing somebody that was very kind. Somebody said that I'll be missed when I leave. That's very generous of you. Thank you for that. But where you work, Kathleen and the others, where you work, and Dustin, where you work is where the rubber meets the road. I mean, that's where the real stuff happens. So thanks for everything that y'all do. I appreciate your passion.
Thank you. And again, we are very thankful that you took time to give us a broad overview of the session and the recap. But I do have one important question for you before we get off. When you transition into your Papa role tomorrow and Saturday and the weekend, are you cooking more hot dogs or hamburgers for your grandkids?
Well, I don't know the answer to that, because it's going to be their choice.
True. Okay.
So whatever they think is what we'll do. What I've learned about being Papa. So for those on the call, we have 4 grandkids now, 3 and under, 3 boys and 1 girl. And what an incredible blessing. What a blessing. So I know this much: to the extent that Missy and I can afford it, they're going to be spoiled rotten. She's already, we're thinking about getting a home mortgage now, a second mortgage, because she is buying children's clothes as fast as they, I think, make them, which is awesome. And I do want to say this: I'm blessed by my family. My wife, I don't deserve her. She's pretty incredible. Anyhow, I'm blessed by my family, and I am blessed to be in the Senate. I'm blessed to know all of you. I'm looking forward. Let's stay in touch. Let's keep having these conversations. because, you know, things can happen just through that. And, you know, we'll be attentive. I promise we'll do our dead level best to be good listeners and to try to help where we can. So I appreciate everyone and your very kind comments that I keep seeing on the screen. That's very generous of all of you. Thank you.
Well, Ben, thanks so much. And we hope everyone has a happy holiday weekend.
Yes, thanks. Same to y'all. Happy 4th, y'all.